taking part. And we are broadcasting from the Lazar Ford Lincoln Studios, WFOY, Lazar Ford Lincoln, driven to inspire. And now, welcome to Affordable Housing Matters, a program on local housing issues presented by WFOY on the first Friday of the month, sponsored by the St. John's Housing Partnership, and produced in cooperation with Mike Bounce Public Relations. Today, Bill Lazar, Executive Director of St. John's Housing Partnership, will be talking with Chris Crothers, Director of Impact Investing for the Jessie Ball duPont Fund. They'll be discussing ways to fund affordable housing. And Chris oversees the fund's impact investing portfolio. He's a certified housing development finance professional. He's often involved with the fund's housing, building reuse, and general community development activities. In addition to hearing the show here, if you go to WFOY Radio St. Augustine Facebook page, you'll see these gentlemen live and in person. Good morning, gentlemen. Take it away.
Good morning, Larry.
Thank you. And we're excited to be here. Chris has a really unique perspective on things. I always tell people that my job is easy, going and begging for dollars. Chris has to listen to all of us and figure out where do they place the money. But I've been involved in affordable housing for 35 years, started in Jacksonville, so I've always been aware of the impact that duPont Foundation has had on the community. So y'all do amazing stuff, but I imagine these days you probably are overwhelmed with requests from people for all sorts of stuff. Just tell folks a little bit about what the duPont, what y'all do. I think that would be interesting for folks.
Yeah, Bill, you're absolutely right. So, after COVID, with the issues around affordable housing, with the issues in communities, it's tough out there, right? So we do get a lot of requests. But so the Jessie Ball duPont Fund, we're a private foundation. We're headquartered in Jacksonville, but we have grantees across the nation. We are kind of unique in the sense that where some foundations kind of rally around a specific issue, like children, our donor, Mrs. duPont, basically said, hey, if I support an organization over a 5-year period in 1960, then these organizations are able to come in and request funding from you. So we have a defined universe of grantees from the 60s, which is a very interesting dynamic when you think about the things that are occurring today, how nonprofits have matured, the types of issues that they were addressing. And since we're talking about affordable housing, to kind of give you an idea of why we have an impact investing arm to the fund, we really have only one grantee out of 318 in our defined universe that has the capacity to do any sort of affordable housing work. So we really needed to go beyond grant making, which is what most foundations are known for, and then use our corpus and our endowment to start investing in some of the bigger ticket items and some of the other areas that we're experiencing crisis in, like affordable housing, where, as a moderate-sized foundation, a $75,000 grant's not going to cut it, right? we really need to bring more to the table, like our endowment, and leverage those dollars to be able to have a bigger impact in the community.
Yeah, housing, I tell people housing is expensive. It's probably right there next to building roads and bridges when you come to what's it going to cost to make an impact. But you've got to start somewhere. And I think, the critical part of affordable housing is that it's almost always got to be a partnership. If you don't have, builders and developers may build it, but they've got to have financing that helps them, and they really need regulatory relief and partnerships from local governments. If you want to get down and help folks under, I would say 80% of the area median income. I've been seeing over the last couple of years, a lot of the United Way groups that I work with, it's hard for many of the social service providers to have a successful outcome if their clients don't have decent, safe, and affordable housing, whether it's rental or home ownership. It's having that stable monthly payment that lets someone manage some of those other expenses or challenges that come along. So I imagine that that's part of what y'all see a lot. People come to you with all sorts of plans, but ultimately at the crux of it is they're also trying to stabilize their base.
Absolutely, yeah. And you think about the defined universe. We somewhat say we have 318 missions that we need to serve, simply because these nonprofits, they're all focused, there may be some similarity, but they're all focused on their mission. So we sort of adopt that, and we try and help them where they are in the continuum to be able to provide whatever services they're providing at a high capacity. But then, but there's the opportunity though to focus on ecosystems, and when we really kind of start digging into the work that we do in affordable housing, because as a moderate-sized foundation, we can't afford to do the heavy lifting that you were just talking about.
Right.
I mean, that's where our cities and public dollars need to come in. So we're looking at how do we also, beyond making those strategic investments in housing proper, how do we really focus on the ecosystem so that capital's flowing into the system, that we're looking at policy in such a way that it influences positively the development of housing. But even Bill, you've been associated with some of the work that we were doing just around trying to attract patient capital and flexible capital here. And the research we found was kind of startling in that when you look at Northeast Florida compared to the state, compared to the rest of the U.S., we lag woefully behind in that sort of capital. And that's the capital that we need to fill in these gaps for affordable housing.
When you say we lag behind in capital, you're not saying that we lag behind in resources. You're saying you lag behind in seeing capital addressing these. I mean, because
right.
St. Johns County, as an example,
Yeah.
we're one of the wealthiest per capita communities in the state. So we've got potential resources. I mean, no offense, poor folks don't move here anymore.
Right.
We have successful people who move here to retire or start businesses, or people who are commuting here and working remotely from Minnesota or wherever else. But that it makes me think that there's a resource that we're not tapping into, that we haven't figured out how to get them involved.
Right. So, 2 points on that. And I always say this in my grant making, where I wear my grant making hat and we're looking at proposals. It's like, if I want to know what your priority is, let me look at your budget, right? So if your priority is X, I'm going to see it reflected in your decisions you're making around your budget. That's kind of the same attitude I take with affordable housing. If you say you care about affordable housing, then, municipality, county, city,
Right.
It better show up in your budget, because
Right.
otherwise you don't really care about it to
Right.
the extent you might be saying. The other piece of that, the capital, to explain that a little bit more in detail, the capital I'm talking about is that flexible patient capital that comes through, community development financial institutions specifically. And for listeners who may not know what a CDFI is or might need a reminder, the ones I'm really referring to are lenders, but they're not depository. They're not your commercial lenders that you're used to going to, your commercial banks. These CDFIs are established to work in lower income areas to really drive capital to where it historically hasn't been driven before. And it's, in many cases, it can be lower interest, it could be longer term. It fills those gaps that you need for affordable housing and community facilities work. And that's what we were tracking. It's like, where is that capital going? And if you think about the state of Florida, outpaces the U.S. average. So at a per capita basis, we know that the U.S. runs about $360 per capita in this sort of patient capital. The state of Florida outpaces it at $400. So we've got money here, definitely, but where is it going? Who's using it well is actually the question.
Right.
It's, South Florida, it's Orlando, it's Tampa, it's St. Pete. Those folks have kind of figured out the riddle, and they're actually tapping into this capital and really putting it to work. And when you look at Northeast Florida, we're at, compared to the 360 and 400, we're roughly.
This facility and a teaching fellow can help you build a new swing and make the necessary adjustments to
Okay,
fix
keep
what
going.
needs to be fixed.
Or no,
Let's wait till we come out. One of the things that I want to do is
features a well-stacked full
when you talk about the places that are doing it successfully, I want to ask you, so why do you think they're doing it successfully? Is it visionary leaders? Is it competent staff? Is it, we've got this big bucket of money and we got to do something with it? Because it kind of leads into the new Senate Bill 102, this live local money that's here. I was talking to Mark Hendrickson, who I think Mark also oversees the Duval HFA. But, Mark said that he feels this is the biggest housing legislation that's been passed since we created the Sadowski Act, which is a pretty big statement.
Exactly.
So at the point that someone is saying, and we have, I mean, we have not just $500 million in Sadowski money. They've actually put $300 million of general revenue money in. That's a significant. So what motivated that? You know, and the fact that it's just there now in big picture doesn't mean that everybody's going to get a pro-rata share of it.
Oh, absolutely.
If you don't see the local government staff step up, your CDFIs and everybody else that we all want to work, I can't do much if I don't have government sort of leading the way and opening the door.
Well, for SHIP, that's definitely needed, right? The sale money, which I'm really kind of tracking, is a little bit different because it's focused on developers. So it's really the expertise of these developers and the willingness of these developers to want to, use the quote-unquote exotic stuff, right? Like the tax credit. So, I think that's where and I don't talk about it, but I think that's where some of these areas have really stepped up. They have developers that have become savvy with the tools at their disposal. I think they're coming in with capital, and they're really coordinating the projects. It's almost like opportunity zones. When those roll out, it's like we're open for business, right?
Well, I think there are a lot of them that are looking. The big question that Bill has is how many of them are willing to stay in the game. Because when you put a lot of effort into something, I don't want to see it disappear in 10 or 15 years, because that's, and that's why I look at developers like Ability Housing and go, okay, we need 12 more folks like Ability. And then the hard part, and this goes back, I started in Jacksonville in '88. I worked at LSS, and I worked there for, it was LSS and then the Housing Partnership of Jacksonville Housing Partnership. And then I came down here in '98. But one of the big challenges in DuPont with the nonprofits is we're almost always required to stab each other in the back hunting for money. And you want to sit there and say, I don't want Ability Housing competing with Ability Housing 2. I want to have enough opportunity for both of them to grow and build and everything else. And that ends up being, well, there's a finite pot of money. It's like, okay, well then let's look strategically and say, do we want some of this to grow our nonprofit or our for-profit mission folks that are going to stay in the business? Yeah,
absolutely.
I mean, I had, when I first started the Jacksonville Housing Partnership, we had both Dick Brody and Nathan Trestle ran the HFA, but it was Dick Brody and John Rood who were on our board of directors. And Dick wasn't building affordable housing; he just knew it was important back in the early '90s. John and Vescor very smartly would go in and they'd buy up an apartment complex. One was going to be market rate, one was going to be affordable in the same neighborhood. They almost took the competition out and kept that on going. And then they got really smart at the tax credit stuff and how to do it. But it was because the Duval County HFA put a lot of money into those tax credit deals. And I used to go sit and listen to their discussions. And they'd haggle back and forth and go, well, if South Trust would give you a quarter less on the interest rate, we could do this much more on the budget.
Welcome back to Affordable Housing Matters. You can make a difference in what has become an affordable housing crisis in our county. Our workforce, ranging from teachers to first responders and restaurant workers, are not able to find decent, safe, affordable housing in one of the most prosperous counties in our state. The elderly and local businesses are also suffering. Now, here's how you can help. If you have property or land, contact the nonprofit, the St. John's Housing Partnership. If you are not in a position to donate for affordable housing, SJHP can possibly purchase and build affordable housing for community members. You can also make a cash donation or bequeath a gift. SJHP can give you further information about the tax and financial benefits of these and other gift methods. Visit www.sjhp.org. And now back to Bill Lazar, award winner, Executive Director of St. John's Housing Partnership, along with Chris Crothers, Director of Impact Investing for the Jessie Ball DuPont Fund. Gentlemen.
Thank you, Larry. Chris, you were talking about how you think there have been some real successful ventures in South and Central Florida. Why do you think that is? Because we've got new opportunities coming up with the Live Local Act. The state's got new affordable housing money. So what do we have to do to pick up the pace here?
So I think it's a combination. It's kind of a perfect storm, Bill. You have leadership in place that understands how they can use public dollars to leverage private investment, right? They're savvy. If we get a minute to talk about it, I'll be glad to talk a little bit about the housing fund we're proposing for Jacksonville, which kind of focuses on that.
Yep.
I think that you have developers in some of those areas that really understand the tools at their disposal. So how can they use tax credits? How can they partner with other corporations to offset the cost? I know when we were looking at doing the Jessie Ball duPont Center here in Jacksonville, we were the second New Markets tax credit deal in the city. And this is a huge tool that at the end of this whole span, you end up with 20% equity in your deal, right? So, people weren't using it. And we're scratching our head, and we actually did a convening around New Markets tax credits so folks could, learn a little bit about it and say, hey, this is something we could do, and we should use more of it to bring this capital here. And literally, we were told by some folks, yeah, we're not interested in the quote-unquote exotic stuff, and it's like, we just want to take on debt. And it's like, no, you need to use the tools that are available to us and use them smartly. I think that to some extent, maybe the Orlandos, maybe the Miamis might be a step ahead of us here in Northeast Florida to some extent, but doesn't mean that we're lagging too far behind. We just need to coordinate and get just a little bit more proactive and maybe a little more expertise under our belts collectively.
The expertise is the critical part. I mean, the tax credit programs are amazing what they do, but I always refer to them. There's this point to where it's almost like a good old boys club. You got to be involved in it, and you got to be knowledgeable before they let you in, and it's hard to learn it, and it's mind numbing when you try and go through. But it creates a great product, and to the attractive part to local government is when they partner with someone doing a tax credit deal, it doesn't cost them that much because there's multiple different layers. And that's, everybody is looking at, well, what's our investment in it and what do we get out of it? But when you can sit there and say, look at this and all it cost us was $1 million, but it's a $23 million project or something, and it's going to be around for the next 50 years, that's worth its weight in gold.
Absolutely, and that's what we're trying to push with this proposed fund, is that the city could pretend it needs to be a public-private partnership for this to work. If the city were to put in 30% of, let's say this is a proposed $40 million fund, if the city was to put in 30% and we were able to bring investors together, including the duPont fund and others, to the table to put in 70, you could leverage that $40 million 4 times. Because of the tax credits, right? So, that $40 million then turns into $160 million in investment that, if the city and the private sector can come together, you're just leveraging more capital to do more projects. And the other piece of this too, you're right, tax credits are great, but there's a limitation on how long the owner has to keep it affordable, so that the importance of having nonprofits at the table that are looking at long-term ownership and long-term affordable, into perpetuity, is just as important to build the capacity of these small developers and nonprofit developers. Because the worst case is, great, we've got affordable housing for the next 15 years, but if it goes online and becomes market rate, it's just kind of a Band-Aid.
Yeah. Well, and it's kind of interesting that the Housing Partnership owns 2 USDA multifamily properties. Both of them were built in the 80s. Both of them were built by developers, one of them who was Chester Stokes, who's very successful here in our area now. But they were built with 1% money. They were masonry construction. They were built and financed for 30, 35 years. USDA requires at the end of the mortgage period, when the owner is able to sell, that they have to offer it first to anybody who's willing to keep it in the affordable housing portfolio, and USDA refinances that opportunity. So we've bought 2 properties like that. We're on the hook for another 50 years, but it's 110 units of housing for seniors that it's worth its weight in gold, because most of the folks there are paying less than $300-400 a month. It only works when you've got that kind of financing and stuff. So the big part, and I really want to talk about the housing, the new housing bill that's come through, but you guys are sort of at the leading edge of helping to create capacity, because you understand that you've got to take some of the folks that are here now, see what you need to move forward, but you want those long-term partners like Ability Housing and other folks You want to grow that base because those are the folks that are in it forever and ever. Amen.
Absolutely.
Our new Senate Bill 102, the Live Local bill is what they call it, is putting $800 million into affordable housing opportunities around the state. And I think to a certain degree, a lot of that's going to go to those who move more quickly. So you guys have got a couple things in place now that might really be an incentive for local government or for developers to be looking at because they know this money's going to be available in June. So what do we have to set up between now and then? Are y'all getting much feedback from people about that already?
Well, I keep hearing, a little bit of an understanding of what we can't do, what might be available, but not real clarity about how the money's going to flow yet.
Right.
So I think that, again, I kind of go back to Sadowski. We were talking about that, and I want everybody to hear me. I'm 100% behind this act. So glad that $700 to $800 million going into affordable housing is so needed. But the Sadowski Act for 20 years has been raided by the state, so we're kind of fixing a problem that had been created artificially.
They took $2 billion over the last 15 years.
Absolutely,
and that's part of why we have an affordable housing crisis now. So we are at least hoping to come back to starting to address that. But I think it comes back to the same thing. If we don't have forward-thinking efforts now, local government folks looking for partners like you and saying, okay, we got this money coming in. The most important thing about Sadowski, because I've built my career on spending SHIP dollars, is that local governments knew from 1992 into 2005, they had a steady source of money coming every year, and you could have a multi-year plan. When the state started raiding the funds, all the planning went out the window. Now it's what can you do in 12 months? And you can't get started in 12 months. You can't hardly get your proposal together in 12 months.
2 to 3 years, right?
So that, and we don't have enough time, but what you have started to do with this new venture in Duval County is opening the door for multi-year planning. It's really sitting here saying, so how are we going to do more?
Right, and the fund that you're referring to, could benefit from this tax or the bill that has been passed, because what it will use is sale dollars, right? And sale dollars, again, when you think about tax credits, 9% tax credits are out the door, and that covers most of your costs. The 4%, there's so many sitting on the sidelines. Right? So how do we pull more of those 4% off? There's always that gap. So what we're proposing here in Jacksonville is a public-private partnership that would emphasize acquisition, which is a huge challenge here in Northeast Florida, but in Duval County. But also, how do you fill that 20% gap in 4% to bring more of that tax credit off the sidelines? And that's how the fund is being developed. And it does allow you to have a longer view of what your projects are going to be, especially when you pair that with the acquisition. So anyway, we're hopeful, pleased that the money's coming in. I feel that we're poised to be able to react to it and use it, which is a great first step.
Gentlemen, thank you.
Thank you.
Great. This has been First Friday Affordable Housing Matters, a program on housing issues presented by WFOY and produced in cooperation with the St. John's Housing Partnership. Join us again next Friday, the 5th of May at 8:30 a.m. And we appreciate your time. And again, thanks to both of you.
Thank
you, sir.
Thanks,
Thank
Bill.
you, Chris.
Absolutely.
Your timing is impeccable.
You still got Facebook on?
Facebook is still on.
Hey, Facebook.
Cinco de Mayo.
Yep.
You should have had me on Cinco de Mayo.
No. There won't be enough for you to have. Thank you, Facebook folks. Again, you can go back to WFOY Radio St. Augustine, and we're going to save it so that you can rewatch this and get that information again. Thank you all for being here.